Hey, what's up guys? Khaled here with the Plant Charmer channel. Today we're going to talk about container growing tips. So here are my 6 best tips for a successful container garden. Let's go. All right, let's talk about container size. So container size when you're growing plants, it's all about the oxygen. So if you pick a container that is too big for the plant you're growing, then that container will never dry out, will turn anaerobic, which is the absence of oxygen. And then your plants are just going to stunt there, or they're going to get diseased, but they're definitely not going to grow the way you want them to grow. So picking the right container means it gets watered at the longest every 2 days. So picking a container that's too large for your plants, let's say I were to grow a lettuce in a container like this, it might need a single watering during its entire lifetime, but it's not going to be able to develop properly and get the oxygen to its root zone that it needs to thrive. So a lettuce goes in a container like this, not like this. So size your containers according to the plant that's going to go in and according to the water requirements of that plant. And the way you actually decide which container is used for which plant is which container will I need to water every 2 days to 3 days maximum for that plant. And that'll give you the answer to that. Tip number 2. Tip number 2 is using the right kind of soil or medium in your containers. Now, I know it could be tempting to just get these cheap $1.99 or whatever bags of topsoil that they sell at the hardware store. That's really, really cheap compared to some better quality mixes. However, garden soil in a container will automatically compact within 2 or 3 waterings. So it's absolutely unsuited for containers. I've had people who have tried my gutter growing techniques or who've built gutter gardens the way I do and then tell me, Khaled, it doesn't work. And I ask them, what did you put in your gutters? And they tell me they just basically took a shovel and took whatever soil was available in their backyard. That is absolutely wrong. You should never do that. So a soil that meets the requirements that we need is going to be a soil that is fluffy, light, that drains, but yet retains water. So how do we achieve these characteristics? There are very good reasons why peat moss and coconut fiber are very, very much used in containers. Now, I'm fully aware of the whole issue of unsustainability of peat moss, and we're moving towards more sustainable mediums as we speak, but coconut coir has its own challenges as well. But we're not really here to talk about that today. I'm going to focus on the characteristics that make a container soil or mix really good. So in this little tote in front of me, I've got some peat moss mixed with perlite, and it's got a little bit of plant food in as well. But if you actually look at what I have in my hand right here, it's absolutely fluffy. This is actually moist. It's not wet, but it's really, really fluffy, and it's got these little white beads here, which we call perlite, and these help with drainage. Now, perlite help with drainage, but they also hold water. I know that sounds like you're going to tell me, okay, well, it can't do both. Yes, it can, because it's got these are basically extruded volcanic rocks, and they've got these tiny, tiny holes everywhere and crevices which hold water droplets. But at the same time, the presence of such a light element in your mix makes it actually better draining. So the mix of perlite and peat moss is extremely popular. Coconut and perlite as well. Coconut is usually used on its own though, but you can mix perlite in, it always helps. This in a container will never compact. And if I actually let's try to turn that into a ball, like if I were actually pressing clay, and see if we can actually be successful at that. Now I know my face is probably turning red, is it? All right, so I don't think I can actually squeeze it any harder than this. Normally, if I had clay, this would turn into a solid ball. So see what I have in my hand here? Now, if I just go like this a little bit, you see how that's called being friable. So that's a soil that is friable, which is perfect for containers. This will hold about 20 times its weight in water. It's going to supply the waters to the roots as they need it, and supply oxygen at the same time. So it's a lot harder to drown a plant in a medium like this, but more importantly, it's not going to compact in your containers. So either get something that's peat moss based, or get something that's coconut based. So if you get one of those 2 mediums, you're going to do super good. Your oxygen levels in your root zone are going to stay great. Your plants are going to be super well fed. These mediums take fertilizer really, really well. So this is what you need for container gardening. So tip number 3 is picking the right type of material. What I'm holding here is a 6.5-inch plastic nursery container. We call them nursery containers because this is what is used in commercial plant production. You've probably bought plants in containers of that type. So of course they are weather resistant. They're cheap. They do not crack in the winter. You can pile them up. I mean, they have a million practical aspects that make them really, really fun to use or cool to use or practical, but they're not the best looking containers. So of course terracotta or clay or ceramic pots will be a lot better looking. Just make sure they have drainage. And if you're going to use these natural materials, you need to bring them inside in the winter or they're going to crack. Concrete is the only one that's not going to crack, but terracotta and clay are definitely not going to be resistant to freezing and thawing. And if you're in a weather pattern or zone like I am here in Canada, where you can get wild fluctuations of temperature, they're definitely going to crack. So I recommend having a set of plastic nursery containers, and these can be used for starting your plants in the spring. They gather heat much more as well because of their color, which brings us to point number 4, which is picking the right color. All right, point number 4. So we're going to talk about container color and why that matters and what does it make in terms of difference. When you're growing plants in either black containers or white containers. I'm going to talk about all the colors in between, but you guys will get the general idea from these two. They're the most common anyway, black containers being the most common. Again, our good old nursery container. The reason why these guys are black is because they're used for plant production in the spring, and in the spring it's a lot cooler, so black containers gather heat more efficiently than white containers would, and this is why they're called nursery containers. So we use them in the beginning of the season. Now I do use some containers of that color, of that type, much larger though, to grow full-size plants. Of course, root zone temperature is going to be better if your containers are white, which is the reason why I use, let me show you guys. You're maybe familiar with this if you've been following my work on social media for the last few years. Rain gutters, this is what I use on my farm. I take advantage of the winter time to perform some tests on different things that I want to try, different new techniques and whatnot. So, but the reason why I want to show you this is because of the color. So the color is white. Now, you know, my rain gutters are used for main season production. So once the plants have grown in and we're in the middle of July or August and the sun is just beating down on these plants and on these gutters, combining a shallow, small gutter that has very limited amounts of volume of soil in it with the heat and the sun, is just going to be fatal to the plants. So black containers will retain heat. We want to do that in the spring. White containers will not retain heat, so we prefer that for main season production. These are the main takeaways here. Let's go on to point number 5. All right, point number 5 is watering regularly, and I'll actually tell you guys and teach you guys how to properly water, how to perfectly water your plants every time. And watering may seem like a trivial thing in terms of technique, but it's actually one of the things that's going to make the biggest difference in your garden. So let's just go back to our container again. So a container like this, obviously, as opposed to growing directly in the soil, is exposed, 1, to heat from all sides. 2, it's got a limited volume in, so as the plants grow, or the plant grows in that container, it's going to consume water at an ever increasing pace or speed. So the length of time between waterings is probably going to go shorter as your plants get bigger. So watering a container like this, it's very simple. There's 2 ways to know when to water. Now, you can take any of your fingers, stick it in the soil to the first knuckle. If you feel moisture, you're still okay. You don't need to water. If you don't feel moisture at all, you definitely need to water. Now, the second technique, which is my preferred technique, is the lift test, the weight test. So what you should do if you're, say, growing in containers like this, is fill one of them up with your growing medium and then saturate it with water. Once it's saturated with water, lift it. Get a feel for how heavy it is when it's fully saturated. And remember that. Remember how heavy it was. You can weigh it actually if you wanted to. I have farmer friends who are just a little OCD and they actually weigh their containers. But I think it's just, you know, overdoing it. So just remember how much it weighs. And when you come to water, you can first run the finger test, the knuckle test. And if you feel like you're not sure if you should water or not, well, just lift the container. How heavy is it in relation to that first time when you saturate it with water? Because when you water plants properly, you want to saturate the plants until they're dry, and then do that again. So introduce a wet dry cycle, which will give plenty of water but plenty of oxygen to the root zone as well. So stick your knuckle in, lift the pot, and if you need to do that, then water. If you don't water. Pro tip for you guys, never fill your containers to the rim. So if you fill them all the way to here, then you're just going to be able to basically water the top a little bit, and you're going to have to wait until that's absorbed by the medium and then come back and do that again and again. And it's going to take a lot of passes for you to saturate the container with water. What you want to do instead is leave about 15% of the container height empty. So a container like this, I would probably fill to here, or maybe to here if I were to go a little bit more lazy and I wanted to be able to water in one pass. And then once you do that, you can use a technique I like to call flood and go. So flood and go is just what it sounds like. You come with your watering wand or with your watering hose, you just flood the empty part. In this case would be this much water, and then you flood that here, and then you just walk away, and that's enough water for your containers to thrive. So let's move on to our final point, number 6. All right, point number 6, guys. Fertilize your containers regularly. Now, I think fertilizing is one of the things that especially new gardeners get the worst. A lot of people online, if you go through blog posts or popular forums or Instagram, will tell you, wow, look, I've grown this, I've never fertilized. Well, you may never have fertilized, but the plants have definitely been fertilized, because where did they create this food or this biomass or this carbon from? So there's always fertilizer involved. The thing in containers is when it depletes, the roots can't just start growing and expanding and searching for water down below. So, and for food, sorry, down below. So you are solely responsible for feeding the plant. And in containers, because you're using most of the time a soilless container medium, which is super high in oxygen, and the plants do usually better in these mediums, while they'll require more fertilizer. So one of the big mistakes I see people making is they'll buy a potting mix, and that's going to have fertilizer in, let's say, already, and they're going to grow their plant, and the plant's doing super great, and they're taking all these photos for Instagram, and it's going great. And just at the point where the plant is about to explode in growth and start fruiting, it starts going downhill. So I'm sure that's probably happened to you before. It's happened to all of us beginner gardeners in our first days. The reason why it does this is as the plants grow, they need ever increasing amounts of food and water. And just when it's at the point where it peaks in terms of food demand is when it actually goes fully depleted in terms of medium, fertilizer in your medium. So it just starts going down in terms of performance. The plants yellow out, they go nitrogen deficient, and they do all these things that we don't want. So the trick for that not to happen is to fertilize your plants regularly. Now, you guys may or may not know, I use organic pelleted chicken manure mostly. I use another formula that has chicken manure in, and it's got potash sulfate, bone meal, feather meal. And that's going to be for phosphorus and potassium as well. But the point is, I'll just take a small handful every 2 weeks, and I'll just dump it on top of the soil. I'll just scratch it in a little, just so my pellets are not fully exposed to the sunlight and to the air and whatnot. So that's going to give me a better result, but that's called top dressing. So I'm going to top dress my containers every 2 weeks or so. And that's going to give my plant the fuel that it needs to thrive and to grow and to produce all these fruits, because we are very demanding of our plants. We are very greedy with our plants. We demand from them that they produce as much as possible with as little resources as possible. So in order for that to happen, well, you got to provide the elements that go into that production, in this case fertilizer. So every 2 weeks is a great rule to go by. Smaller amounts more often are better than large amounts less often. So remember that. It's a bit more work, but again, Isn't gardening love? All right, guys, so that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to share it. Don't forget to like. But most importantly, don't forget to apply these tips in your gardening. Keep it green. I'll see you next time.